Good evening, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with the National Weather Service with you on this November the 8th. As always, we encourage you to stay up to date with your local weather information from the National Weather Service by calling 1-800-472-0391. Weather.gov/Alaska is your place to go online on your phone or mobile device. Try mobile.weather.gov. Type in your location, save it to your home screen, and now you have a bandwidth-friendly place to get your National Weather Service forecast on your device. But if you can't find what you want from the National Weather Service, whether that's about the Alaska Weather Show or anything you find online or on the phone, please let me know. david.snyder@noaa.gov, and I'm happy to serve you any way I can. Here's a look at the hazardous weather across our state. We're going to start in southeast tonight. A little fake job there. Yeah, it's like a good basketball move, but not quite. Here's a look at the northern parts of southeast. A winter storm warning continues until about 6 o'clock, and for many locations in the Haines and Klondike highway areas, the conditions should be rapidly improving. But what we were noticing earlier today was that it just wouldn't stop snowing, generally above Haines and Skagway. And for Haines downtown, it turned to rain fairly early in the afternoon, but after that, conditions were still snowing up the highway. And until about 6 o'clock, as much as 2 to about 5 inches of snow is expected to fall in that area, and that should be winding down through the rest of the evening. Out west, different story. We're talking about wind and wind pushing water toward the Norton Sound region, all the way from the Yukon Delta through to Norton Sound, the south-facing coast of the Seward Peninsula, and also including St. Lawrence Island, the south and west-facing coasts there. We're expecting to see a little bit more of a push of water. A high surf advisory is posted right now. This is not a coastal flood watch. But Golovin will be one of the places that we're going to keep an eye on there for a little bit more of a choppier sea, let's say. And in some cases, the worst of it would be the tides coming up about 3 to 4 feet above the normal highest tide. So prepare for that, and remember that minor coastal erosion could occur in this type of situation. And if you have damage, make sure you report it. You can do that to the National Weather Service in Fairbanks or through your local VPSO, and that information will eventually travel our way. So we appreciate that. Pictures are wonderful too. Feel free to email those to me, and I'll be happy to share them as well. The drought monitor here in southeast, still looking dry for the southern third of southeast. We're in level 2 drought, or severe drought. That's called D2. You can see that's from about Petersburg southward, including Ketchikan, Heidelberg, Craig, and Klawock. North of that, just a little bit of a slender strip of D1, or moderate drought. So again, recognizing that there are significant impacts for regions that have not seen a lot of rainfall, especially through late summer and early fall. North of that, including the capital city, all the way through Sitka, Gustavus, Haines, Skagway, it's listed as D0, or abnormally dry. Yes, it has been dry. It also includes Yakutat, by the way. It has been dry, but not nearly as significantly so as what we've been seeing around Ketchikan, Heidelberg, Craig, and Klawock in the southern end there, all the way up toward Petersburg. So conditions may be improving locally where you are, but they're still listed as very dry and abnormally so, if not severely so. So you can always check this out anytime at weather.gov/Juneau. Easy way to check the drought monitor status. Your communities are being updated on this once a week from the National Weather Service in Juneau, but you can easily type something into your web browser if you want to see where things are and see the larger scale prognosis, not only for Southeast, but the rest of the nation too. Just type in UNL, that's University of Nebraska-Lincoln for short, UNL, and then drought monitor, and you'll come up with a picture that's very similar to this. Here's a look at the satellite picture across the region for your Thursday afternoon. The big concern right now that's keeping weather going across the west coast is that Bering Sea storm. North and west of St. Matthew, it does have storm force winds and a lot of cold air coming in behind it. That's really helping that westerly flow speed up. And as this front makes its way across the west coast, starting late tonight and into tomorrow, we're going to start to see that westerly push start to make things pretty choppy here across the Bering Strait region of St. Lawrence Island and Norton Sound. So north of the Yukon Delta all the way through Norton Sound, the south and west facing coasts of the Seward Peninsula, and the south and west facing coasts of St. Lawrence Island is where we're going to see those high surf conditions. An advisory again has been posted posted for tomorrow all the way through tomorrow night. Now, up north, the snow is winding down across northern parts of southeast, but there's plenty of rain across central and southern parts of southeast at this point tonight. We'll continue to see that. For the Anchorage area, it looked like a little bit of snow was going to fall across some of the lower terrain late last night and early this morning, and didn't really pan out. A layer of drier air got in there and just kind of literally sublimated the ice crystals into water vapor, and we did not see a whole lot more than flurries across the region. It has been snowing across the Copper River Valley. Areas out around Golcana have seen some light snow today. Fairbanks has seen some snow up across the eastern interior, also looking at snowfall today. In between, high pressure is building back in. You can see that kind of upside down shaped U pattern or horseshoe shaping up there. That's a good sign that high pressure is building in at 1,023 millibars there. You'll notice some light snow up around Arctic Village, southward down the Alcan border, and then out to the west, a lot of nothing, a lot of drier sky, a little bit of sunshine today, and then our big Bering Sea monster there at 984 millibars, a front coming in across the west coast and into Bristol Bay tonight. A strong southerly flow is working up the west coast. It's what's behind that, though, that has our attention. That westerly flow coming in will continue to push eastward, and as it does, the front goes away, but this long fetch of westerly winds starts to build in, and that again will affect everywhere from the Yukon Delta through the Norton Sound region and the Bering Strait region. It also has some snow and rain and snow mixed in with it. It's still fairly warm. And so once you get away from the coastline, it does look like it will have the opportunity anyway to mix in some rain and snow together. The north side of that is going to be colder, so we've got snow coming in for Shishmaref and parts of the lower Kobuk and Noatak valleys, as well as the middle and upper Koyukuk. And across the west, snow showers there for Shemya, and then rain as you move eastward across the Aleutians, some breaks in the clouds there, and also some wind coming across the Alaska Peninsula. Watch for a rain-snow mix around Kodiak. Better chance that'll be more rain than anything else. Low pressure still sits around Yakutat at 1,011 millibars. With that, we expect rain showers across a large part of southeast tonight, and then dwindling areas of rain and snow across northern sections of southeast, including the Haines and Klondike highways. Showers continue in the region tomorrow. High elevation snow is possible, but that should be winding down. Area of low pressure sits across the northern Gulf. With that, we expect more of a northerly, drier flow around most of the Kenai Peninsula, Anchorage Bowl, and the Matanuska and Susitna valleys. But just to the north and west, up in the mountains and over the mountains themselves, do expect some snow to fly across the middle Yukon Valley, all the way down toward the coast. And as we're talking about, that warmer air is still there. There's plenty of open water as well. And with that, we expect to see rain and snow closer to the coastline, including places like Nome and then out west toward St. Lawrence Island. As you move further out, though, that west and southwesterly flow is lining up to push water up to the Yukon Delta, Norton Sound, the south-facing coast of the Seward Peninsula, and St. Lawrence Island. And because of that and that low-pressure system that's still there and the length of that fetch, we do expect to see some high surf in the region. High pressure is sitting at 1,026 millibars by Friday afternoon, slowly moving out of the way. That was that big bubble of cold that's been sitting there. And that helps to draw in more of a south and westerly flow for more parts of the interior and southwestern Alaska. Notice more of an offshore flow developing around the northwestern coastline of the Beaufort Seacoast. Should have relatively quiet weather. Winds building in for the central and western Aleutians as well. As we get into Saturday, low pressure is lining up across the western Gulf and the North Pacific to drop to around 981 millibars. This is the system that's been here, and all of a sudden it just kind of drops in place across the northern Gulf, and it intensifies. With that, we get a stronger south flow across most of the Gulf. It lines up with a deep area of moisture across the Pacific, and that means it's probably going to turn out to be a fairly wet and windy period for the northern and western Gulf Coast. You can see the 3 dots there. That means more dots than 2 dots, right? Right. So what that means is more rain. This is the heavy rain symbol, so we get into kind of a moderate, normal rain here. This would be a heavier rain, and this would be the prime position for that to happen. A lot of moisture gathering up ahead of that low pressure system, and moving into the Kenai Peninsula likely means snow for the higher terrain as well. Southeast dries out a little bit. You'll probably keep the clouds, maybe some breaks in that across the southern panhandle, but up north there's a chance you'll start to see snow again around the higher terrain above Yakutat all the way around toward Cordova. Across the interior, look for some breaks in the clouds as the wind is rushing over the Alaska range. It should be drying out. We'll end up with some light snow across the upper Yukon, across the Beaufort Seacoast, and once again across the northwestern coast for the Kobuk and Noatak valleys. And across the central and western Bering Sea, periods of rain and snow there. The south side of that should be all rain, showery across the Aleutians, but the winds will be coming up again in response to that northerly flow behind low pressure. The result of this could mean some snow for parts of South Central. We'll refine that forecast as we get a little bit closer to time if you're traveling in this way. Here's a look at temperatures as we get into your Friday morning for southeast 30s and 40s. It looks like a fairly mild period there, and that's why it's raining. Lower 30s around Prince William Sound. South Central is expecting lows in the lower to mid 20s tonight, above freezing for Kodiak, down to 3 around Fairbanks. Healy looking at a low of 1 below, 2 above around Eagle, 4 below in Fort Yukon. AKwx Pass expecting a low of 2 with single digits and teens for most of the North Slope. Wainwright about 16, Kaktovik near 10. Teens and 20s for the Kotzebue Sound area. Kivalina, you're looking at about 17 degrees, as well as Kotzebue, 25 for Shishmaref. In the Norton Sound region, low to mid 20s, 36 around Savunga and Gamble, 20s and 30s for Southwest, 33 in St. Paul, and temps in the mid to upper 30s for most of the Alaska Peninsula, including Sand Point and all the way westward toward Shemya, Attu, and Adak. As we look at high temperatures for your daytime tomorrow, expect single digits around Fort Yukon, but just about everywhere else will at least be in the teens, and the North Slope will probably push into the 20s. Around the Kotzebue Sound area, look for low to mid 20s there, low to mid 30s for most of Norton Sound, 38 around St. Lawrence Island, 39 for Macoriac, and pushing into the upper 30s and lower 40s for King Salmon, Dillingham, all the way up toward Bethel, about 33, a little bit cooler inland there. Lower to mid 40s for most of southeast. Look for south central temperatures to be just above freezing around Kenai, Homer, Seward, about 37, 45 in Kodiak, 44 around Cold Bay and False Pass, and 43 for Unalaska and Dutch Harbor. Overnight lows on Saturday, looking at or just below 0 for Arctic Village and Fort Yukon, about 7 at Fairbanks, 15 or so for Anchorage, 30s and 40s for most of southeast. Southwest looking at temps closer to 40 degrees, Nome around 25. And afternoon highs on Saturday, well, about the same for the north, near 10 degrees for many locations, including Utqiagvik, 21 in Anchorage, or Fairbanks, and 32 around Anchorage, with southeast looking at a high of 41.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
On the aviation weather now, you'll notice IFR conditions starting out your day around the YK Delta into Norton Sound and right up to about Nome or so, just around Atkasuk and south of Barrow itself. You'll start off with IFR and generally east of Fort Yukon and bleeding over into the Old Crow area of Yukon itself. Northern sections of southeast still dealing with some snow and poor visibility, low ceilings in the morning there. IFR to start out around Chilkoot and White Pass and up toward Hyder. Otherwise, most of the Panhandle and Northern Gulf will be dealing with marginal conditions, and some of that's pulling away from the Kodiak area. You'll see improving weather as we go through Friday afternoon, mainly around the Kodiak Island up through Cook Inlet region and also into Prince William Sound. But MVFR over land, the Copper River Valley, most of the Alaska Range passes is expected there, and most of southeast will be under MVFR with some of the higher terrain under IFR conditions. The YK Delta and into Norton Sound expected to hold on to IFR conditions around Unalakleet and points north. Across the North Slope communities there, especially around Atkasuk to Wainwright and east, but just south of Point Barrow expecting IFR conditions there, and IFR building in from the west with the next wave working across the Bering Sea. Also looking for IFR and low ceilings from Nunivak Island out to the Pribilovs and then east and south toward the Alaska Peninsula, Sand Point, and north and east there you start getting back into marginal conditions. Still looking at generally VFR for Saturday morning around Prince William Sound, most of the Kenai Peninsula and a large chunk of the Susitna Valley, but not all of it, and into the Copper River Basin around Fairbanks looking for IFR Saturday morning, and also around Juneau northward toward Haines and Skagway. As we get into the afternoon, IFR consolidates a little bit more across the west over the Alaska Peninsula and then building out across the Gulf of Alaska. Marginal conditions really for most of southeast into the eastern side of the Kenai Peninsula, clearing up a little bit more across south and western sections of the upper Kuskokwim into the Tanana Valley. Northwest areas looking at more MVFR by Saturday afternoon, then IFR conditions there over Kotzebue Sound. Let's take a look at your pass conditions. For Anaktuvik and Adigan Pass, we expect marginal ceilings and visibility through all day Friday. As we go into Lake Clark and Merrill Pass, marginal conditions should hold on most of the day. Rainy Pass expected to start at VFR with slightly worsening weather. Windy Pass holding at MVFR all day long. Isabel, we expect to see marginal conditions most of your Friday. Same goes for Mentasta Pass. Tonita Pass will probably lean over toward IFR conditions as the day goes on. Portage Pass also starting out generally clear and leaning over to MVFR a little bit more on the east side, but Saturday looks a lot better. And Chilkoot and White Pass, we expect to see at least IFR in the morning, then some improvement, and then back to IFR conditions as we get into your Saturday. Freezing levels have the 2,000-foot freezing line across the northern Gulf all the way out across the Shelikof Strait region to about Sand Point, and the 4,000-foot lines holding over the Dixon entrance there. So generally most of the state is below freezing, and certainly not a whole lot of room there for southeast to see a whole lot of warmer weather right now, considering the weather pattern we just talked about with the maps a minute ago. Friday, we were looking at icing potential holding around 2 to about 4,000 feet and above, isolated moderate for most of the Kobuk and Noatak valleys in the upper Koyukuk and parts of the middle Yukon Valley. There's a patch of icing potential there, generally north and east of the Alaska Range, and then across the western Gulf, also around the next wave, working its way across the western Bering Sea southeast. And most of south, central, and southwest has no significant icing threat, it looks like, for Friday. The jet stream shows our large trough across the Bering. Really hasn't moved very much. It just keeps sending waves out and away from it. We have a ridge building across the central and eastern Pacific there, and that's been pushing the southwesterly flow into south and western Alaska a little bit more. So a predominant southwest flow is what we have for tomorrow, 70 to 90 knots coming in there. Northwesterlies for most of southeast, though, those wind speeds anywhere from 60 to 100 knots. And so at 9,000 feet, our southwest flow is pretty much driving the western half of Alaska. Southeast still getting in a little bit more of that west and northwesterly shift. 20 to 35 knots overhead for the interior, about 20 knots or so generally from the southwest. 35 knots over south central. Southwesterly is closer to the west coast at 30 knots, and much stronger weather across the central and western chain, 40 to 50 knots there. You can see that reflected at 3,000 feet, 22 as strong as 50, even 60 knots in some cases. Southwesterlies continue there for most of the mainland, anywhere from 15 to 30 knots, the strongest of which will be across the west and northwestern coasts. A general west flow coming across the Gulf towards southeastern Alaska at about 15 to 20. Turbulence then will continue, especially in the morning for southeast, generally below 4,000 feet. Watch for considerable moderate there across the northwestern parts of the Alaska Range, the Cook Inlet region, and also around the Bering Strait region below 4,000 feet, and St. Lawrence Island included in that. The eastern sections of the chain from Akutan and Dutch Harbor on Alaska and east toward the Alaska Peninsula, and then for the central and western chain as well below 4,000 feet.
Sunset planets and the morning star returns.
Welcome to Stargazers. I'm Dehne Regas, astronomer from the Cincinnati Observatory.
And I'm James Albury, director of the Kika Silva Pla Planetarium in Gainesville, Florida. If you're a morning person like I am, you've been waiting over 9 months for the news Dehne and I have for you.
That's right, James. Our sister planet Venus has returned to the morning sky after spending over 9 months gracing our evening skies.
Now, you're probably asking yourself, why do planets make these back and forth appearances between the evening sky and the morning sky? Well, Dehne and I will give you the answer.
Plus, if you enjoy watching the sunset, we have some planets gracing the sunset sky as well. What are we talking about? Let's show you. Okay, we have our skies set up for just after sunset on Sunday night, November 11th, facing southwest. The most obvious thing you'll see is a slender 4-day-old waxing crescent moon. Near the moon, you'll see my favorite planet, the ring planet Saturn. Make sure you get outside to observe Saturn during the month of November, because soon it will be disappearing behind the sun.
That's right, Dehne. We've had the planets in the evening sky all summer long, but now they're all one by one disappearing behind the sun. Venus left a few weeks ago, and Jupiter just recently disappeared.
And if you look near the horizon, you'll see the next planet to make a disappearing act, Mercury. Being the closest planet to the sun, Mercury's year is very short, only 88 days. Mercury has been in our evening sky since the beginning of October. It'll be at its brightest this week, and then it begins its journey toward the morning sky, passing between us and the sun during the last week of November.
And speaking of passing between us and the sun, mark your calendars, because next year, on November 11th, 2019, Mercury will again transit the sun.
You heard it here first on Stargazers.
Let's now aim our attention to the south. Same night, Sunday, November 11th. High in the sky, you'll see the red planet Mars.
Mars is entering the constellation of Aquarius, the water bearer, and you'll be able to see it in the evening sky until well into next summer.
We passed Mars back in July, and we won't pass Mars again for another 26 months. The nice thing is, we get to see Mars in the evening sky for a fairly long time since we're traveling in the same direction. We're just going 10,000 miles per hour faster than Mars, so we're slowly leaving it behind.
All right, let's check out the morning sky and see what awaits us. Rise and shine, James, it's 6 a.m.
Wait a minute, I'm already awake. Shouldn't I be waking you up?
Yeah, good point. Well, all next week, you're going to have an exciting reason for getting up with the chickens because our sister planet Venus has made its reappearance in the morning sky.
If that wasn't exciting enough, right next to Venus all next week, starting on the morning of Monday, November 12th, Venus will be in conjunction with the bright star Spica.
Spica is the brightest star in the constellation Virgo the Maiden. It's a blue giant star approximately 250 light years from us and over 11 times as massive as our sun.
Spica is the 16th brightest star in the sky. However, Venus will totally outshine Spica all next week. Surprisingly though, if you look at Venus through a telescope, you'll notice it will look like a very slender crescent, much like our moon, when it's in this part of the morning sky.
Even as a thin crescent, Venus is dazzling. Venus reflects almost 70% of the sunlight that hits it, thanks to all its cloud cover.
Speaking of clouds, where's Jupiter?
Oh, I'm glad you asked. Jupiter is heading behind the sun, from our perspective, and won't appear in the morning sky until early December. But mark your calendars for the morning of December 21st, the winter solstice. Jupiter and Mercury will have...
Don't say it.
A conjunction!
Woohoo! So, there you have it. Mercury, Saturn, the Moon, and Mars in the sky at sunset next week.
And the ever-dazzling Venus in the morning sky with Spica next week. It's all there for you to see when you keep looking up.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Onto your sea ice edge now. The Beaufort seacoast hasn't changed very much at all. We're seeing a little bit of new growth there across the western edge of this ice pack. The marginal ice zone there expanded just a little bit, but really no significant changes from what we were talking about yesterday. There's still some protected areas that have ice forming there on the upper end of Kotzebue Sound, Norton Bay inside of Norton Sound, and still some marginal ice across the northern end of the Yukon Delta. But with stronger winds and high surf conditions there, the changes will probably be significant in the next couple of days. So I wouldn't plan on finding any substantial ice just yet. As we look at Friday in southeast, look for southerlies across Stevens Passage, 15 knots and 3-foot seas, southwesterlies that are fairly light across Clarence Strait, and light northerlies in Lynn Canal. Look for a north and westerly wind that's a little bit stronger as you go southward from Sitka, about 20 to 25 knots, 12 to 13-foot seas there. By Saturday, we're expecting a south and westerly flow across the outer coast. Easterlies across the northern Gulf, 15 knots there, and winds stay fairly light across the inside passage with 2-foot seas expected for your Saturday in southeast. For south central, a westerly flow across Cook Inlet, north to south, 10 to 20 knots, 5 to 6-foot seas across the Barren Islands here, a stronger westerly flow around Resurrection Bay and in the northern Gulf, westerlies at 20 knots, 8-foot seas outside of Hitchinbrook Entrance, and northwesterlies inside of Prince William Sound with a 2-foot sea there on 10 knots. Northeasterlies come in on Saturday with a 4-foot sea, 6-foot seas on the outside. North and easterly winds coming into Cook Inlet and across the Barrens around 40 to 45 knots with seas building to 12 to 14 feet. Northerlies coming down Cook Inlet to meet it at 30 to 35 knots there with 6 to 10-foot seas developing, especially higher once you get south of Kenai. Let's take a look at Shelikof Strait and southwest. You'll notice on Friday westerlies moving across Kodiak Island at 20 knots with a 4 to 7-foot sea on either side. 8 to 15-foot seas coming up the Bering Sea coast of the Alaska Peninsula and into Bristol Bay, 25 knots there. A southeasterly flow into Sand Point and points further down the Pacific coastline, 20 knots with a 6-foot sea. By Saturday, you can see a much stronger flow feeding into this very healthy area of low pressure that's stretching all the way from the northwestern Gulf into the southern Bering Sea here. And with that, storm force winds trying to develop across the region with 45 to 50 knots, 17 to 19-foot seas. Through Shelikof Strait from AKwx all the way out towards Sand Point. Slightly less wind in kind of the lull of this low pressure system here, but there will be some high seas and strong winds throughout the day. 10 to 13-foot seas there in the Bering. Across the Aleutians, westerlies coming in from the western chain, 30 to 40 knots. Considerably less wind as you move east from Atka to Unalaska, anywhere from 15 to 30 knots with 20-foot seas there. North of Unalaska and Nikolsky, out west, you're looking at about 16 to 19-foot seas, and you can see a stronger push coming in behind that isn't quite on the map. As we get into Saturday, you can see that swell that's moving its way from Adak to Kiska. Look for seas to come up anywhere from 15 to 20 feet if you use the scale, and that's what we're seeing there north of Adak to Atka and out toward Kiska. 35 to 45 knot winds, the strongest of which will probably be around Adak and Atka, and then eastward 25 to 30 knots between Nikolsky and Unalaska with a 10-foot sea. So quite a bit of changes there over the weekend, especially in the Aleutians, but no surprise seeing the map. We'll look at that again in just a moment. In the meantime, on Friday, southwesterlies will be strong. High surf advisories are posted from the Yukon Delta all the way into Norton Sound, the south-facing coast of the Seward Peninsula, and the south and west coast of St. Lawrence Island for potential of minor coastal erosion, but probably looking at some seas that'll come up about 4 feet above normal high tide in the region, especially eastern Norton Sound. We're looking at seas out at sea at 19 to 23 feet at their worst, and as we get into Saturday, you can see more of an offshore flow responding to low pressure moving southward, so we get that offshore flow reversing everything. 5 to 12-foot seas in the region, easterlies at 40 knots with a 14-foot sea for the Kuskokwim Delta, and northerlies for St. Paul and St. George. Up north, we have an offshore flow fairly light, southwest to 10 over the ice, easterlies across the Chukchi coast, 15 to 30, with a 6 to 8-foot sea, again blowing offshore and out of Kotzebue Sound for Friday, and then a little bit of a weak southerly flow develops on Saturday. Otherwise, it's a northeasterly flow coming down the Chukchi coast and over the Beaufort, 15 to 25 over the open water. 4 to 7-foot seas there on Saturday. Recapping tonight's weather, winter storm warnings will be expiring shortly for the Haines and Klondike Highway region. Otherwise, it's rain for most of southeast tonight. Showers of snow for southwest and up north. Snow should be winding down, but winds will be moving in for the west and southwest in the next 24 hours, especially for the west coast, Norton Sound, the Yukon Delta, southern coast of the Seward Peninsula, all the way out towards St. Lawrence Island. Coastal flood advisories or high surf advisories are posted. I'll say that right. High surf advisories. High pressure moving eastward, and another strong storm develops in the northern Gulf and the southern Bering as we head into the weekend. Thanks for watching.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.